Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Cavan Community and Culture Show with me, your host, Grace McKiernan. Coming up later in the show, we have an interview with Heather Bothwell and Tomás O'Reilly, who I was talking to all about Rath Church in Killeshandra. We'll also be talking about the best that's coming up in Cavan's culture, heritage, the arts and community events. But first up, we have an interview with the lovely Jackie O'Neill and Joe Doherty. Jackie is an artist based in Ballyhaise. She created an exhibition in Ballyhaise College as part of Heritage Week, using the landscape as an inspiration to explore themes of folklore and the story of the local land. She collaborated with woodworker Joe Doherty, who created pieces of art from the trees around the college. I caught up with Jackie on the last day of the exhibition to talk about how it all went, and afterwards went for a walk with Joe as he explained to me a bit about the inspiration behind the pieces that he created.
The exhibition has been really positive. There's been a constant footfall of people coming through. So really pleased with that. You know, usually when you're out of Cavan town like this, not in the urban setting, you expect it to be a bit quieter and you're going to be maybe sitting reading your book, but there has been no chance for that. There's been a constant footfall of people, loads of local people from Ballyhaise coming through, so that's really positive. That's what I wanted, because that's who it's for, really, you know.
And why did you choose Ballyhaise House itself to do the exhibition in?
Well, this is where I'm from, Ballyhaise, so it's about my own sense of place, really. I went to primary school in these grounds. The school was too small when I was growing up, so they had to put one class down in the courtyard at the back of the house. So I suppose it just resonates with me from way back. I have a lot of memories. I think it's a stunning house. I think the architecture it doesn't get seen that often, and it deserves to be seen. So it was just it made sense that this would be a great place to showcase some work about the surrounding land.
And you yourself lived in London for a couple of years, and then you moved back. Did you move back to Ballyhaise then afterwards?
Yes, so I lived in London for 3 years and gave up the city life and moved back to Ballyhaise. And
did that kind of inspire a kind of rediscovering of the countryside, or like kind of inspire the exhibition that way?
Well, definitely, because growing up here I was just so used to it, but it's that whole thing of greener fields are far away. After living in the city, I had it was like coming back with new eyes, and I just the flora, the fauna, the quietness, the wiseness of the landscape was all new to me again, and it really inspired me creatively.
And one of the main theme of the landscape, or theme of the exhibition, is landscape. Mm-hmm. And how has Ballyhaise itself inspired that?
How has Ballyhaise inspired it? It's just so rich in the landscape. It's very unusual for its beautiful oak trees and its flora and its fauna, and then the stories of folklore. Ballyhaise just particularly is so beautiful. The townland names all have really ancient meanings to them, going way back to Jackie O'Neill, apparently camped on the lands of Ballyhaise. A lot of the fields are named after him. So I suppose the land tells the story. It literally tells the story. It has named the land. And so my exhibition kind of brings you right back to those times, right up to modern times, where I speak to local people now about what they think of the land. So yeah, it's kind of me investigating the history of my sense of place where I'm born, but it's about the land informing that history for us.
Yeah, like you were just describing, history of Ballyhaise from way back to Jackie O'Neill all the way up to modern times. That's a huge part of the exhibition.
Yeah. It's probably the most historical work I've done yet, where I'm really responding to stories and narrative, but 50% of that is that I'm also responding to the landscape. So they're dreamscapes. They're looking at these stories of Jackie O'Neill, the O'Reillys, but again, it's very vague. We really don't know. We've got little snippets of information. So what I've done is I've applied those snippets of information to what I can see now. So under this one here, for example, the hill of the river, that's the townland of Drumholm, and that translates directly as the hill of the river. So that's a clue to how the people lived. Why did they name it that? But in the roots of the tree that still exists, I have a story that I read about the O'Reilly family and the castle. But again, we're not sure if it really happened. Nobody really knows. So that's why I call them dreamscapes.
And do you think, like you were saying, like a lot of it is kind of snippets of information that would be coming down, kind of storytelling through the ages? Do you think that we're kind of, as a country, we're kind of losing out on the art of storytelling, which would be such a huge part of Irish culture?
What I couldn't believe was how, what was surprising to me was how little information I could get my hands on before this house. And there was a lot of information, very interesting information about this house and the landlords, and that was great, but I wanted to go back further. And it just isn't there. Snippets, which we can't really rely on. So that made me sad, because I think 400 or 500 years ago isn't that long ago. What I did find useful was the UCD folklore collection, which would be storytelling. That was Eamon de Valera set that up in 1938 and got the students, primary school students in rural Ireland, to go home and speak to the oldest person they knew from Ballyhaise, and their stories, and they're about the locality, and they're online now and archived safely for us, and anyone can view them. But that's something I'm quite aware now that we need to start laying it down. But also, I think if it makes sense to you, it is important to archive, but I don't want to get too bogged down in that either, because I think the land has a lot to tell us, and our imagination can tell us a story, and just slowing down and looking at the land. And I feel that that's what I've done in this exhibition. I've got what I can, and then I've kind of let the land tell me the rest. So.
And you worked with children in Ballyhaise recently on collecting folklore stories as well.
Yes.
Yeah, and how did that come into the exhibition?
Yeah, well, this project is funded through Heritage Ireland, and it was part of Heritage Week, but also it was mostly funded through Creative Ireland. And one of their cornerstones in their funding is that they want us to include the younger generation in rural areas and make them aware of art. So it made sense for me to bring this project to the younger generation. So that was what I did. Was I showed them the stories that were collected in 1938, but it wouldn't work now. It wouldn't work for me to send those children home and get them to interview the oldest person they knew, because the oldest person they know probably wouldn't be from Ballyhaise anymore, because people don't stay in their locality. So what I did was I got them to respond creatively to the stories that we already had. But we talked a lot about the stories that were gathered, and we went through what townland they lived in, and I told them what it meant, and we created a picture, which is part of my show now. So it was a collaboration I did with the school kids of Ballyhaise, and it informed them about the history of Ballyhaise.
And you also collaborated with Joe Doherty,
yeah,
and Lisa O'Neill as well at
yeah.
the opening. And how did that collaboration come about?
Yeah, well, my idea for this was that I wanted different artists with different mediums to respond to this idea of the land as an archive. So Joe is a woodworker, so he was actually given wood from this land, and that was his canvas, I suppose, and he has a sculpture trail outside, and I think that is going to continue on for a while anyway, and it's a response to nature and looking at the land as an archive, and it's really beautiful. So that made sense. We had worked together in the past, so I just knew he was the right man to work on this project about the land as an archive. Lisa is my sister. She's from Ballyhaise. She's a very well-known singer-songwriter, and I just knew that this, again, she has responded to some wonderful historical stories of legends of Ireland, and I thought, well, this will be perfect for her because it's her hometown as well. So she wrote a song. She was commissioned to write a song for this project about Ballyhaise, and she performed it that Saturday for the first time to Ballyhaise people. It was really special, and it was called Breffni Born. So hopefully you'll be hearing more of that.
Yeah, hopefully, yeah, that'd be great. And what's next for yourself then?
What's next? I don't know, Grace. I haven't had time to think. Well, I have a gallery in Cavan town that's opened all the time. I had to close it for a few weeks coming up to this because I really needed to just get really creative and messy and turn it into a studio. So I'll be opening that again and getting on top of commissions that I had to people were approaching me with commissions, but coming up to this I just couldn't. I was so consumed by this Ballyhaise project. So I'm going to be getting on the top of a few commissions and then think about what's next, but really I don't know. something maybe less historical, really, to be honest. I'd like to do something a bit more playful. Not that this wasn't wonderful, but it was just, there was a lot of structure to this. I really had to break it down and tell the story and try to get through every era and honour all the interviews and honour all the historians. And that was, while that was wonderful, it was maybe I'd like to do something a little bit more free-flowing for my next project, whatever it may be.
So we're on Ladies' Walk on Ballyhaise. So it's a tree-lined walk, lime trees and oak trees, mature oaks. So I was part of the Scealta project just to develop some artwork for the walkway. So the material I used, is part of the artwork, and material has all come from the land here. So this lime piece is made from lime wood. So just decided to open up the log and see the insides of the tree. So the first couple of pieces on the walkway here are just about what makes up a tree. So we're looking at here is it's a log of lime. It came from a branch of one of these trees that was cut down a year or two ago. So I carved in the leaf, the berry, the seed, but you can also see the inner structure of the wood, the wood, the grain, the colour of the grain, the texture of the wood. So these trees were planted by the Humphreys families, the Humphreys back in the 1800s. So I just wanted to mark that with the first piece because it's close to the house here, and they're kind of responsible for the parkland design of all the trees that you see. Like all the trees around the whole house were specifically placed here. So that's the first piece. Then I have another piece down here, and it's just an interactive piece of how old is this oak, so people can go down and count the rings on the tree and date it. So it's a beautiful old oak tree. It's down about 40 years. It's an old stump, so I just we dragged it up here and just placed it in here. I just think it has a great dynamic to it. So the wider part of the ring is the growth during the spring, summer growing season, and then the narrower one is from the growth season that might happen in autumn and winter.
I remember that from school.
Yeah, exactly. So and different times you can see the growth rings are really far apart here, so that would have meant like a really good growing season, and then you might see some other growth rings of a wide winter growth that was a real kind of mild winter where the tree was able to grow in the off season as well.
Have you had many children coming along and
teaching
them about
there's been lots of kids coming up and guessing it, and it's just nice to see people just up touching a piece of wood and the nature, and we're leaving the walkway up for another couple of weeks until the national schools open up.
Great.
So hopefully it'll encourage the whole nature walks and nature trails back into the schools.
And was that kind of a bit of an aim for you when you started thinking about the pieces you wanted to include in it, that you wanted to kind of inspire a bit of a love for trees and
yeah, definitely. Well? The artwork the idea of it is that it nestles in amongst nature's art, that people can just take a moment and stand back and look at what's in front of you, because we take the trees for granted, and they're a big part of our heritage, a big part of our civilization. The trees accurately record weather, growth seasons, weather, what state the land was in, and that. So that's just a little bit about it. And this is my own interpretation just on growth rings, and time is such a commodity in people's lives now that I kind of just wanted to capture growth and time within a piece. So turned that on the lathe. It's made just from pine, from old fencing posts from here. So all the material has come from the grounds of Ballyhaise. So it's
Jackie was talking to me a lot as well about how the history of Ballyhaise encouraged her and inspired her a lot in her exhibition, and I guess the trees in a sense kind of tell a history of the land of Ballyhaise as well.
Yeah, well, the trees are the most honest part of the landscape. That they hold the ground together. The roots hold the ground together. They give the landscape some shape and form, and they provide a home to thousands, if not millions, of animals and insects. And so this is one of the giant oaks. It's a real good example of a mature oak. It's on